Bloodsport is a 1988 American martial arts action film directed by Newt Arnold and starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, Leah Ayres, Forrest Whitaker, Donald Gibb, Chiao and Bolo Yeung. The film centers on Frank Dux, played by Van Damme, a United States Army captain and a ninjitsu practitioner who competes in an underground full-contact martial arts tournament called the Kumite in Hong Kong. It was one of Van Damme's first lead roles and showcased his athletic abilities, launching his career as a mainstream action star. The screenplay is based on many of Dux's claims, first covered in November 1980 issue of Black Belt magazine. The real Dux served as an action choreographer and technical advisor. After its release, many of Dux's claims were disputed, including by co-screenwriter Sheldon Lynch, who claimed Dux fabricated his fight record and the existence of the Kumite tournament. Bloodsport was produced by Canon Films and released by Warner Brothers on the 26th of February 1988. Despite mixed critical reviews, it was a considerable box office success, grossing $50 million on a budget of $2.3 million. It developed a strong cult following and has been cited as an influence on the development of mixed martial arts, better known as MMA. It also spawned 3 direct-to-video sequels. Now, the real Frank Dux is a Canadian-American martial artist and fight choreographer. According to Dux, a ninjitsu expert named Sensei Tanaki trained him as a ninja when he was a teenager. He established his own school of ninjitsu called Dux Ryo Ninjitsu and has said he won a secret martial arts tournament called the Kumite in 1975. Dux's victory at the Kumite has been disputed, as has the existence of both the Kumite tournament itself, as he described, and of course Sensei Tanaki. Dux served in the United States Marine Corps service from 1975 to 1981, and he claims he was sent on covert missions to Southeast Asia and awarded the Medal of Honor. He asserts he was recruited by the CIA as well. His military records, however, show he was never sent overseas and not received any awards. Dux states the military sabotaged his records to discredit him. He has been accused of falsifying his military service by authors, and his claims to have worked by the CIA have been dismissed by the Director of Central Intelligence, Robert Gates. Dux worked as a fight choreographer in Bloodsport, Lionheart in 1990 and Only the Strong in 1993. He detailed his alleged work for the CIA in a book called The Secret Man in 1996, and the same year that he co-wrote the story for the film The Quest alongside Jean-Claude Van Damme. He sued Van Damme for breach of contract over the film, but lost the suit in 1998. He also lost a lawsuit against Soldier of Fortune for libel the following year, over the claims he had falsified his military and CIA service. Now, co-writer Sheldon Lynch came up with the idea for the film. According to Lynch, he said, "I'd known Frank Dux for a number of months before I came up with the idea for Bloodsport. Frank told me a lot of tall tales, most of which turned out, of course, to be bullshit. But his stories about participating in the so-called Kumite event sounded like a great idea for a movie." There was one guy who he introduced me to named Richard Bender, who claimed to have actually been in the Kumite event and swore everything Frank told me was true. A few years later, this guy had a falling out with Frank and confessed to me that everything he told me about the Kumite was a lie. Frank had coached him in what to say. Producer Mike DeSully said he was looking for a new martial arts star who was a ladies' man, but Van Damme appeals to both men and women. He is an American hero who fights for justice, the American way, and kicks the stuffing out of bad guys. Bloodsport was entirely filmed in Hong Kong. So it was one of few films featuring scenes filmed including Kowloon Walled City before its demolition in 1993. Other locations include the Peninsula Hotel, Causeway Bay, Hong Kong Trail, Victoria Peak, and Stanley Fort. Bloodsport's soundtrack score was composed by Paul Herzog, who also composed another Jean-Claude Van Damme film called The Kickboxer. The soundtrack contains the songs Fight to Survive and On My Own, both performed by Stan Bush. Bush's songs are replaced on the soundtrack with an alternate versions sung by Paul Delph, who was nominated for a Grammy for his work. Bloodsport has been credited for popularizing the concepts of full contact and mixed-style martial arts competitions among mainstream audiences. Early mixed martial arts events such as UFC 1 were sometimes compared to the film. The shoot-style professional wrestling event, GCW Bloodsport, promoted by mixed martial artists Josh Barnett and Matt Riddle, is inspired by the film. Bloodsport was an inspiration for the video game Mortal Kombat, and Johnny Cage, one of the characters, is a parody of Jean-Claude Van Damme. For his performance, Jean-Claude Van Damme was nominated for the Golden Raspberry Award for Worst New Star, but lost to Ronald McDonald in Mac and Me. Now look, where do you begin to review a film like this? On one hand, it is really an 80s action flick. And for some reason, I really have a nostalgia for 80s sort of movies like this, with a real kitschy soundtrack, over-the-top montages, hammy acting and a cliched storyline. And look, this film in some ways is moderately entertaining. The fight scenes by today's standards, of course, are quite basic, but there's something about the overall setting, with the setting of this underground tournament, torches lighting up the room, as the participants illegally compete, facing severe injury, if not even death, all in the hope of winning this illegal tournament. There's definitely a sort of romanticism to the whole idea, of course, albeit far-fetched and, of course, proven not to be real. Look, let's get the good parts out the way first. One of the most significant strengths of Bloodsport lies in the action and of course fight sequences. Albeit somewhat dated and hammy by today's standards, the film does feature an array of martial arts styles and impressive choreography that captivates. And of course, what more can you say about Jean-Claude Van Damme's physical prowess and charisma? The man was at the peak of his abilities here. His body is cut, and he's in supreme fighting shape, pulling off fantastic karate kicks, and doing his trademark splits a total of 7 times during the whole film. Now look, the plot is fundamentally straightforward, focusing here on the underground Kumite tournament and Frank Dux' journey to compete in it. The simplicity allows the movie here to concentrate fully on the action. At the end of the day, this is really about the fighting. Now, even though Jean-Claude Van Damme cannot act emotionally, as it were, he managed to build a fantastic career for himself out of his fantastic physique and phenomenal athleticism. And that is fundamentally what you're watching this film about, is to see Jean-Claude Van Damme kicking butt. The film, however, has many weaknesses. One of the main criticisms has to be the lack of depth of characters. Most of the characters, of course, are fully underdeveloped here, and serve merely as plot devices to set up fight sequences. I mean, it's strange to see a good actor like Whitaker really just doing nothing. And of course, Leah Ayres here as the so-called love interest Janice Kent is really just a waste of time. Not to mention the overly irritating Donald Gibb as Ray Jackson. Also, the one thing I have to mention is Jean-Claude Van Damme does not remotely sound American in this film, even though he's playing an American army hero, supposedly. As was typical in the 80s, there's a lot of stereotyping and cultural representation. This film really reinforces cultural stereotypes and really comes off feeling cliched and potentially offensive, especially looking at it in today's eyes. Look, the cinematography and editing are somewhat dated, but you have to take it into context that this was an 80s film. Look, Bloodsport is a film that has undoubtedly left a lasting impact on the martial arts action genre, and of course introduced Jean-Claude Van Damme as a prominent action star. Its exhilarating fight scenes and Van Damme's athletic performance continue to attract fans and maintain its cult following. However, the film's weaknesses in character development, cultural representation, and of course the historical accuracy cannot be overlooked. While I think for martial arts enthusiasts and 80s nostalgia fans this may be an entertaining watch, it really fundamentally isn't a good film. But it's kind of so bad that it really is kind of fundamentally entertaining in a strange way. And because it remains a nostalgic and iconic piece of 80s action cinema, Bloodsport gets a 6.5 out of 10.